You know, in the entire history of cannabis, there's one name that casts a longer, darker shadow than any other: Harry J. Anslinger. This was a man with a mission who almost single-handedly took a common plant and turned it into a national threat. And to really get why things are the way they are today, you have to understand his story. So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling here. Because the story of cannabis prohibition in America, it isn't really just about a plant, is it? It's so much bigger. It's about power, it's about politics, and it's about the deliberate creation of fear. And pretty much all of it comes back to this one guy. All right, so let's dive in. First up, we've got to meet the man of the hour, Harry Anslinger. And to get what drove him, you really have to picture the scene. We're talking 1930. The whole country is going through some major, major changes. So Anslinger gets tapped to be the first ever commissioner of this brand new agency, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, or the FBN. Think about that for a second. The federal government had never had an agency specifically for policing drugs before. So this wasn't just some cushy government job. No way. He was handed an incredible amount of power to shape the nation's drug policy from the ground up. But here's where it gets interesting. Just 3 years after he starts, bam, alcohol prohibition is repealed. So suddenly, the main reason his big, shiny new bureau even exists, poof, it's gone. Anslinger's in a tough spot. He's got this agency, he's got this budget, and he needs a problem to solve. He needed a new public enemy. And he found the perfect candidate: cannabis. And this, right here, is where the whole story just takes a really, really dark turn. See, Anslinger didn't go after this with science or, actual facts. Not at all. What he did instead was launch this incredibly calculated and, frankly, vicious campaign of pure fear. I mean, just listen to this. This is a direct quote from the man himself. Let that sink in for a second. That one sentence, it tells you everything you need to know about his crusade. This was never, ever about public health. It was all about tapping into the worst racial and social fears of the time. He knew exactly what he was doing, which buttons to push to whip up a full-blown moral panic. And his targets were crystal clear. He went right after marginalized communities, linking cannabis to them over and over and over again. He'd paint this picture of jazz clubs, calling it satanic music, and claim that marijuana was fueling it all, corrupting the youth, tearing down society as they knew it. I mean, this wasn't subtle stuff. It was blatant, it was ugly, and it was by design. Okay, so he's got his targets. Now what? Well, now he needed to build a monster. He put together this massive propaganda machine with one single goal: take this plant that people knew that was pretty familiar and turn it into something foreign, something terrifying. And his main tactic was a total rebranding. This is actually pretty brilliant in a sinister way. He started ditching the common names people knew, like cannabis or hemp. Instead, he started hammering this one word: marijuana. Why? Well, it sounded foreign. It sounded Mexican. It was all about creating that link in people's minds. He took something people used for medicine and textiles and just completely flipped the script, saying it was the cause of violence and insanity. The absolute peak of this whole campaign, it has to be the infamous 1936 movie Reefer Madness. I mean, if you watch it today, it's almost funny. It's so over the top. But you have to remember, back then, this was passed off as a serious educational film. It showed people who used cannabis as these violent, deranged maniacs. It was pure fearmongering 101. And the scary part? It totally worked. So, mission accomplished, right? He's got the public completely terrified. The next logical step for him was to take all that fear and turn it into law. And by that point, the momentum he'd built was just, well, it was unstoppable. And just look at this timeline. It shows you how fast this all happened. I mean, it's stunning. 1930, he gets the job. By 1933, his original target, alcohol, is gone. He pivots. Just 3 years later, Reefer Madness is terrifying audiences. And boom, the very next year, 1937, he's got his federal law. It was a swift, decisive, and brutal campaign. And the law he got passed was the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. And here's the thing, it was sneaky. It didn't actually ban cannabis. Instead, it wrapped it up in so much red tape and slapped such ridiculously high taxes on it that it was impossible to deal with legally. It effectively made it illegal without ever saying the word ban. And just like that, farmers, doctors, regular people, They were all turned into criminals overnight. But getting that law passed in 1937, that wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. In a lot of ways, it was just the beginning. The beginning of a long and destructive legacy that would be felt for generations, not just here in the US, but all around the globe. 32 years. Just let that number sink in. That's how long Harry Anslinger stayed as the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, from its creation in 1930 all the way to 1962. For more than 3 decades, one man had almost total control over America's drug policy. And his influence didn't just stop at the US border. Oh no, he took his crusade international. He was one of the main architects behind the drug treaties that basically forced his model of prohibition on the rest of the world. So that culture of fear, that stigma he worked so hard to create, it went global. And it's something we're still trying to untangle to this very day. So when you look back at it all with what we know today, it's just so clear. This whole decades-long war on a plant, it was never about science. It was never about keeping people safe. It was a house of cards built on racism, on one man's need to keep his agency relevant, and on just plain lies. And all of this really just brings us to one final big question. The story of Harry Anslinger is a huge cautionary tale, right? It really makes you think, when our laws and our policies are built on fear instead of facts, who is the one that ends up paying the price for that legacy?